event that this live stream sort of quits or stops, we do a couple things. We have on our YouTube page at Fellowship Bible Chapel, we have a videos tab and a live tab. When I'm talking here at 11 a.m., approximately 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings, the stream will be under the live tab. So if you go to our Facebook page, click on the live tab, you'll see the stream that appears there. What we always do, because sometimes we lose internet connection and that type of thing, we're out in the country, although I don't know that makes any difference in this day and age. We always repost the video so that it's under the videos tab. So every Sunday we post things twice. And sometimes when the stream gets interrupted, we're recording, so we'll post it both places a second time. So just so you know, I only do one video on a Sunday, but sometimes it gets posted in a couple different places, and sometimes in one of those places it'll be posted a couple different times because the stream gets interrupted. So we were having some technical difficulties today. So if you've ever been to the UN in New York, so this is World Beatdown. And if you go to the UN, as you're entering the UN, there is a statue, this statue. If you've been there, you'll see it. And it's always accompanied with the verse from Isaiah, and they will beat their swords into plowshares. It's actually a verse about the millennium that the UN uses outside its thing to show how, they're working for peace, right? I mean, it's so obvious that they're working for peace. And so I thought that given what went on at the UN, and I'll talk about it today, but there was a lot of meetings at the UN. What was supposed to be a 1-day became a 2-day and a 3-day meeting to talk about a 2-state solution in Israel, because Israel is the problem. And I'm not sure, I haven't watched the probably 15 hours of videos of these people that are recorded and out there. You can find them on the UN multimedia website if you're inclined to torture yourselves. But I'm not sure that the hostages in Gaza ever really came up. So I thought, well, since the world is not right now, they say on the statue that the swords will be beat into plowshares. That will lead to world peace. But I think what they really mean is they're beating Israel into a plowshare. So that, by the way, that was my own idea, and I remembered that. So I will take full credit for that, whether you like it or not. So this is my wheel of prophecy. And boy, this thing, if I could animate it the right way, it would be spinning like a top, because there are a lot of things going on. And one of the hardest things I did, I had to sit down with Mark Sutherland. I don't know if that's the only one I did this week or not. I usually do anywhere from 1 to 4 interviews, talks with different people. And there's so much going on. It's really hard to keep up. And I spent a lot of hours going through things, and there is a ton of stuff that's left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. So what I'm doing now is I send a note to myself each week with links. I'm taking those links. Some of them are wacky, crazy people, but I always like to present to you their actual words and that sort of thing. And I have some of them that made the cut into the update today. But those links will be posted in the show notes on YouTube. If you go down, there's a little thing where you click on more, and you'll see all of those links. A lot of those are links that do not get into these updates, because there's just too much going on. And it was funny because I was sitting here preparing my sermon for this morning, first hour, and then some other things, and I'm checking the news, and it's like, wait a minute, they had an earthquake in Russia this week, right? It was like it didn't even really wasn't even making the cut, and it was one of the 5 most powerful earthquakes ever recorded in human history. Occurred this week in Russia, caused a tsunami, and I saw a note that Crescent City, California had $1 million damage to their harbor. Pam and I were just there. I think we stopped there and had pizza, which is what you have in a seaside town, right? Is pizza. Pizza and clam chowder, maybe. But we were just there back in May. And there's a lot going on. Lot going on. And there's some things, too, that are going on. I don't want to overuse the word unprecedented or unprecedented in recent human history type things, because there's a lot of that. And so this is sort of one of our operative terms. And there's some other passages I might make reference to today as I'm talking. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Verse 8 of Daniel 12, although I heard, I did not understand. And I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white, and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise will understand. As it also says in Daniel 11, as we point out each week, it also says that the wise will instruct many. And so I think that ought to be our goal, is that we ought to be watching these things, evaluating them in the light of Scripture, so that it is safe to say that we live in a world where ignorance and confusion are rampant. Or as one of my friends and Bible prophecy speaker used to say, the world's problem today is apathy and ignorance. Ignorance and apathy. We don't know and we don't care about what's going on. So we want to make sure that we're not part of those. So I'm going to move up here. So this is going to jump around. So I'm going to talk about events in Israel, Gaza, the UN, and then I have some AI things at the end that I think are kind of fascinating. And by the way, there will be an AI prophecy technocracy roundtable on August the 13th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, August 13th, Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And so one of the things that was operative this week was everybody thinks that the solution to peace in the world, not just in Israel, not just in Gaza, but all over the world, is tied to a two-state solution. Now, look, I don't think Israel's going to agree to a two-state solution. And we have this passage in Daniel 9:27, which I think is still operative, by the way. And he will confirm, make stronger, enforce a covenant with many for 1 week. Now, not a covenant, the covenant, but that's not necessarily, the parameters of that covenant are not defined. But it does also appear to be tied to what's later said in that verse about stopping the sacrifice and oblation. So it seems like, well, if they're going to stop sacrifice and oblation, what can you unpack from that particular phrase? Well, it must have started again. And that's something that has not been taking place in Judaism for some time. And it's tied to the Temple Mount. And you're going to see some things today on the Temple Mount that are really, in recent human history, are unprecedented, that are happening. And they're kind of, for those of us who love and support Israel, they're kind of emotional to watch and talk about. So you'll see that. But understand that the world, they've always, so they talk about a two-state solution. It's a misnomer. When the land of Israel was under the British control, and they had before that in 1916, they had a thing called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The French and British split up the Middle East. And the French and British sat down because they're arrogant Europeans. You know, they let us into World War I and then into World War II. So, of course, they must know exactly how everything should work, right? Because they're so good at starting wars. So they split up the Middle East, and they did it along lines that they thought would work, but we now know that they didn't. It's been an area of conflict ever since. But understand, all these countries we see in the Middle East right now, they didn't exist back in the 1916, 1917, 1920. But in 1920, they had a conference at San Remo, and they decided that the area of what's today Israel and Jordan would be divided into two states. Israel west of the Jordan River and an Arab state east of the Jordan. So when they call it the West Bank, they mean the West Bank of the Jordan. And that's really kind of a misnomer because the world agreed west of the Jordan would be Israel, a state for the Jewish people. And by the way, this is before the Holocaust and everything. They were already deciding this. And we know from Mark Twain that this area was largely desolate and unpopulated in the 1860s. Mark Twain go read The Travelers Abroad. You can find it online very easily. And he was very this thing is a wasteland. Nobody lives here. We traveled, 2 days. We didn't see a single person. And that's his eyewitness testimony of what Israel looked like in the 1860s. So the world decided, and the world agreed through that meeting at San Remo and some others, that there would be two states, Arab state east of the Jordan, a Jewish state west of the Jordan. And that was never accepted by the Arabs. And then in the 1960s, Russia thought, well, this would be a good way to get everybody at odds with each other. We'll make up this thing called the Palestine Liberation Organization. And a lot of Arabs moved into that area from other countries. Just like Jews had moved into that area from other countries. As you know, if you look at population of Jews in Arab countries back in 1948, there were tens of thousands. Now they're virtually nothing. I mean, some countries have one, maybe 10, maybe 20 Jews. And nobody ever talks about those people being displaced back in the 1940s. So, Yasser Arafat himself was an immigrant from Egypt, probably the nephew of the Hajj Aman al-Husseini who worked with Hitler to try to eradicate the Jews. So they did try a two-state solution. Back in 2005, every single Jew, dead or alive, was made to leave Gaza. Now, wait a minute. Yeah, they dug up the bodies of Jews buried in Gaza and moved them. Why? They knew what people in Gaza would do with those bodies and use and hold them hostage. Just like, they're doing right now. Same principle. So here is a tweet. The son of Hamas, I can't remember his name right off the top of my head. October 7th didn't happen because Palestinians were denied a state. It happened because they were given one. Gaza was theirs, no occupation, no settlers, no Jews. It was Judenrein is the term that they use. Just them ruling themselves. And what did they do? They began preparing for war. Never forget that. And that's absolute 100% truth. And it's going to continue for a very long time. Let's see. Okay, let me touch on this real quickly. So I have talked about, a lot of Bible prophecy guys don't talk about it, but I've been doing it, as you know, for a long time. Demographics. We live in a world where the demographics of the world are rapidly changing. In other words, what's the population mix by age, sex, male, female? I only use two genders around here. What does that look like, and what are the projections into the future? So when you study demographics, one thing they tell you is looking further than 50 years into the future is probably really in the realm of guessing. But out to 50 years, you can look at population trends, birth rates, and that type of thing, and you can make some pretty strong conclusions. And one of the things that you can conclude right now is that what's going on in terms of demographics is unprecedented, there's that word again, in human history. Populations are collapsing. People are not having children. It is a major problem in the West, in every developing country, and it's even becoming a problem in Arab and Muslim countries as well. Probably the only area of the world that's really still pumping out babies is Africa, but they're eventually going to hit the wall. But if you look, you go back a few years, they were projecting that 2050, 2100, that there might be 5 cities in the world that would have 100 million people in population. Now, you've been to New York. That's what, 8 million? Los Angeles is 4 million. Chicago's a few million. And you know what can you imagine a city 30 times more populous than Chicago, or 12 times more populous than New York City? And 4 of those cities were going to be in Africa. And some of them would be cities that you haven't even heard of. Now, I think there's being some revision done on those, but still, those countries are on track for huge population growth if nothing changes. I think it's Nigeria will soon be as populous as or financial news. Old people need taken care of. Usually that's been done by younger people, but now we don't have the younger people to pay for the older people. And she's right. The only way to really tackle this is to tackle long-term illness, to allow people to live longer and be more productive longer into their later years, which would, I think, if people live longer and were more productive, they would only cause the aging problem to be worse because they're going to be around longer. But you also see that there's this rise of assisted suicides, euthanasia. And in some countries, particularly in Europe, I think in Switzerland, they have a euthanasia law, assisted dying. You get assistance in dying. You're not productive, you're a drain on society. Move on. Go into the clouds, so to speak. In Switzerland, which a lot of people would say, it's like the headquarters, it's the real operative nerve center of the UN is in Switzerland. Assisted suicide has increased over the last couple of years by 870%. Now, I view this as a problem. I view this as a big religious issue, among other things, but it's happening. I saw another article. I don't know if see if I can. Here, I do have it. It's also from the front page of the Financial Times the other last week. The number of children in Chinese kindergartens has fallen by a quarter in 4 years. Okay, by the way, if your income went down by a quarter in 4 years, you would really be hurting. So the number of children in kindergartens in China, they still have a lot of people, has fallen by a quarter in just 4 years, prompting the closure of tens of thousands of preschools in the country as a precipitous drop of births hits the education system. Enrollments in China's kindergartens have dropped by 12 million children between 2020 and 2024. 1.5 New York cities, just in kindergarten in China, they're gone. From a peak of 48 million, it's crazy. The number of kindergartens serving Chinese children aged 3 to 5 has also fallen by 41,500 kindergartens from a high of 295,000 in 2021. That's a fourth are gone. The kindergarten's gone. People who had kindergartens, they don't have those jobs anymore because there are no kids. Well, guess what happens if we go out 20, 30 years? When those kids that are not there would have been in childbearing ages, that means there's less children. And a lot of this comes from this, I believe personally, this is a judgment of God on China for the one-child policy, unrestricted abortion, forced abortions. You can only have one baby. The other problem there and in India, they did sex-selective abortions. Woman would go to the doctor. She finds out she's pregnant. Is it a boy or a girl? If it's a girl, they have an abortion. Well, despite what people want to believe, if you have no girls, then you have nobody to have babies. That's a judgment of God for that evil practice that they were engaged in. And in between China and India, numbers may have changed, but a few years back, I researched this. And between China and India, they were approaching the place where they would have, between the two countries, those two countries alone, 150 million men of childbearing age with no prospect for a wife. Now, what does that do to geopolitics? Does that make the men go look someplace else, like in an army? This is a huge problem, and this is nothing ever like this in human history. So then when we look at geopolitics and Bible prophecy, how does it affect Bible prophecy? And we know China has designs on some areas in the world. We talk about, by the way, there's a guy I've been following. He's pro-Ukrainian and he doesn't like Vladimir Putin. And to me, that's okay. But I find him to be very factual. His name is Paul Warburg. He's got a YouTube channel, and he's much better than me. He does 18 to 28-minute videos. They're chock full of information, and he apologizes when he goes to 28 minutes. Now, I've not learned any lessons from him I've only learned to be factual, but not learned any lessons on length. But he made a very good point this week that I'd never really thought about. We talk about, what does everybody talk about? China. Where are they going to go? Where are they going to attack? Taiwan, 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 Taiwan. And he makes a good point. He studied history, and he said the whole art of Chinese war is deception. To get you looking somewhere when they're going to go somewhere else. And what does China have designs on? What does China need, even with its declining population and everything? They need oil and gas. They don't really have those resources. And they need water. Now, this week they had problems because they had massive flooding in Beijing. I don't know if you saw the pictures of these, just these, here's the term again, unprecedented floods in China. They have plenty of water there, but like with any flood, the problem is capturing that water to use later. They don't have those resources. They're building, by the way, massive reservoirs in the Himalayas, damming up rivers. The Chinese government reminds me of these locust-type creatures who were going through the universe, taking all the resources of a planet in the movie Independence Day. That kind of it's like a picture of the Chinese government, because they're always like, so they go up to the Himalayas on these rivers and they dam them up, and they're building some of the largest reservoirs ever built in human history. But what's happening? Well, the rivers go from the Himalayas all the way down through like Laos and Vietnam and everything. The Mekong River, the delta's drying up because the river's dammed up. And so now there's a problem in Vietnam. China doesn't really care. They got the water. They're upstream. And this is causing huge problems. So China needs water. Okay, so is there a place near China that they could invade and take over that has gas and oil and water? Well, why do they? There have been conflicts between the people who live in the area of Russia, Siberia, and China for a long time. There's a thing called the Great Wall of China. It wasn't built for a tourist destination. It was built because they wanted to keep the hordes out coming into China from the north. What are now today the Siberians and Russians. In fact, it was actually, the wall was known historically in some quarters as the ramparts of Magog, to keep those hordes out. In fact, you can look at old maps and you can see that Korea Peninsula was called Gog Korea. Interesting. Don't know if that has anything to do with what we read about in Ezekiel 38 and 39, but it's something that people should factor in because those are the historical facts. So anyway, China, there is in Russia, there is, I believe, it's the deepest lake on the planet. It's like 4 times deeper than Lake Superior, which I think is a quarter mile deep. So this thing's like a mile deep, and it contains about 25%, I hear, of all the fresh water on the planet are in this lake in Siberia. They have oil and gas in Siberia. They have ports. And so some analysts believe that China is not really after Taiwan. That's a distraction. They really want to go get that oil and gas and resources in Siberia and Russia, including the port that was damaged in the big earthquake that took place this week, right? Seems like it was a month ago. An 8.7 or 8.8 earthquake, one of the 5 most powerful earthquakes in human history, took place up there, and it may have damaged a very important naval port for the Russians. Nobody knows the extent of the damage. And I'll talk about that maybe. So anyway, so this is a big problem. Demographics, resources, all of these things are becoming very, very big deals. So somebody sent me a note. Well, I'll have to verify that one later. Enough wars for now. Okay, so slide number 3. And then here's this other sort of what the world was concerned about was the creation of a Palestinian state. This dominates the news cycle. It's all over the place. And again, when secular people and people that run governments and world organizations and that type of thing, when they're concerned about things and when they talk, it sounds like Bible prophecy, it's probably a good idea to pay attention to it. Now, I'm not saying this is that, but I think, at some point we have this we're going to get out of here thing, right? And then we have all these things happening. And the question is, do they become fulfilled before we're out of here? When do those lines cross? And we're getting closer on a lot of them. So the UK and Europe must decide, This is from the Financial Times the other day. Must decide, will they continue to issue statements or will they take action on terms of a Palestinian state? Recognition of Palestinian statehood is not enough. What do they want? Well, what Erdogan wants is he wants Israel, right? This was a tweet that he put up a week ago. I'll read the translation, since English is one of the only languages that I speak. The symbol of Istanbul's conquest. Okay, so what's the picture of? Talk about it all the time. Hagia Sophia, which is the largest church ever built in Christianity. Not a church anymore. 5 years ago, the symbol of Istanbul's conquest, the legacy of faith, Hagia Sophia, reunited with its first call to prayer and first prayer 5 years ago today after an 86-year hiatus. To Erdogan, this is a very big deal. Showed you that poster over and over again. Endless thanks be to my Lord for granting us the opportunity to witness the revival of Hagia Sophia. Yesterday, Hagia Sophia, today Damascus, tomorrow Jerusalem and the Jews. That was just on Erdogan's Twitter feed a week ago. There was a picture last week in the New York Times on the front page. And we'll talk a little bit about this now and then a little bit more later on in the update. You're thinking, wait a minute, it's going to be a later on in this update? When is that? When are you going to get to that? The New York Times, so here it is, the picture I showed you last Sunday. Sunday morning, front page, above the fold, a picture of a mother holding a child. Starvation in Gaza, look at this terribly starved child. Now, a lot of people in Israel and elsewhere and here, we said that's fake news. That child has a genetic disease. It's very common in Gaza because of intermarriage. I'm sorry, that's a fact. If you look to the right, the big picture there, that's a bigger picture. By the way, there's also some indication that this lady might not even be in Gaza. She might be in Yemen. Well, why would that be relevant? There's a big famine going on in Yemen. It dwarfs what's going on in Gaza. Do you even hear about it? How many protests took place this week anywhere in the world about famine in Yemen? That's right, 0. How many, by the way, a much, much bigger famine is currently underway, and yet another Arab country, Sudan. How many protests, how many meetings at the UN took place because of famine in Sudan, starvation in Sudan? So there's some indication that this actually might be a picture of a lady in Yemen, but what do you see in the big picture? See how the New York Times cropped it so that it was the mother holding the child? And it was done for a very specific emotional purpose to Christians. And I saw European Parliament members say, this reminds me of the suffering of Christ. If you've been to the Vatican, you've been to St. Paul's Cathedral there in the Vatican, you'll see the Pietà, the Mary holding the wounded, dead Jesus. Very famous statue of Michelangelo. That, Hamas is smart. They did that to invoke those religious feelings. Look at the Jews killing Christians. That was the message that they were trying to convey. So, what do we know? So, here's a tweet. New York Times admits the emaciated boy they splashed on their front page as proof of the famine in Gaza was actually suffering from a serious medical conditions, which is why all his family look healthy. And you see the child's brother there who looks pretty good, not starving. Exploding a child's illness to push a political narrative is reprehensible. She's right. And by the way, The picture on the front page of the New York Times got viewed probably over 60 million times around the world. The correction that they put up, which was this, that they put up on their Twitter account, we have appended an editor's note to the story about Mohammed Zakir al-Matakwa, a child in Gaza who was diagnosed with severe malnutrition. After publication, the Times learned that he also had pre-existing health problems. Read more below. And then they go on and they say, so they put up the tweet, and it says children in Gaza are malnourished and starving, as New York Times reporters and others have documented. We recently ran a story. It was fake news. The correction, so the story, 60 million views. The correction, last count I saw, was 88,000. So about 1,000 times more people saw the fake news than the correction. So, starvation is a problem. So this is, let me see some things. Okay, so this is kind of out of order because I think the points need emphasized. So here is a tweet. Islamic Jihad, this is Eitan Fischberger, an Israeli guy who does a pretty good job of putting up things, just released a photo of Israeli hostage Ram Braslavsky. Left before captivity, right today. Somebody else posted, we finally found somebody starving in Gaza. It's the Israeli hostages. And they're awful. So here's what this guy looked like before. Here's what he looks like today. Food is scarce. We barely get anything. For 4 months, I've been in a grave. I suffer from psychological and physical problems. The entire day, I have my hand on my stomach from the pain. Stop the hell that we are living in. Please stop this torture, this hell. I am begging you, please. So, by the way, the great journalist, Piers Morgan, saw that video and he said, oh, wait a minute. All you people said we can't believe stuff from Hamas. Now you believe this video? Piers Morgan, his name is, they have, the G and A should be replaced with an O. M-O-R-O-N. Piers, you can do the math on that. And Hamas puts out the captives are going to rot in Hamas dungeons. And understand, this is part of a design. These are two Hamas guys, two Hamas commanders on video speaking. And look, this is the age of social media. Videos get released all the time. Here it goes. Our issue is not just Palestine. Our issue is killing every non-Muslim. We will pursue Jews and Christians all over the world. Either they convert to Islam or we'll kill them. And yet people celebrate that. Another Muslim guy, I think I don't remember where he's from. It's a very long tweet. There's a link in the show notes to the entire thing. You should read it. Read what they say. Israel believes that it destroyed Gaza, but in fact, it destroyed the Western model that had dominated the Islamic mind for more than a century. Today, after the Gaza genocide and the exposure of Western hypocrisy, we are witnessing for the first time a major shift in the Islamic world from obsession with the Western model to the search for a model based on Islamic civilization itself. The only thing Israel has succeeded at is making Gaza a graveyard for Western civilization. So, what's the takeaway from that? They have an entirely different worldview than we do. And by the way, there are people in our worldview that are really pretty bad at developing a good worldview too. So, excuse me one second. Two. Okay. Okay, I'll talk about this in a moment, but China's going big on AI. They're all in on it. Everybody's all in on it. Some of the things you'll see at the end of this today are shocking. And then here's Melanie Phillips, the great Melanie Phillips, talking about who's running for mayor of New York. Zohan Mamdani leads among Jewish voters by a 17-point margin in the race to become New York City's next mayor. Mamdani, a Shia 12er Islamist, will bankrupt and Islamize New York and pose a threat to its Jewish community. With their Pavlovian reflex to support the Democratic Party and its anti-West, anti-white, anti-Jewish ideological dogmas, it was entirely predictable that before long, these U.S. Jews would themselves become a threat to the Jewish people. That moment has arrived. And I will say this, Melanie Phillips, who I have utmost respect for, is not a crazy fire-breathing person. She is as rational, calm, and historically and ideologically rooted as anybody you will find or follow in media today. She's a superb individual. She's very smart. So when Melanie Phillips says, we're reaching the end of Western civilization, you should listen to her, just like you should listen to Victor Davis Hanson, who I think one of his recent books says, called The End of Civilization. We are at that moment. And how is the world going? How are things going to go? Okay. Well, I'll talk about it now. Well, I'll come back to it. This is from the UK. Class snobbery is at the heart of the NHS gender war. So there are people within the UK who get it. They're very concerned about what's going on in the United Kingdom, in England, and Scotland, Ireland. They're under assault. They have huge problems with Islamic invasion. I saw an article in Daily Mail or Telegraph the other day that the population of the UK had increased by 700,000 people in the last year. They're not having babies, folks. Those people are all coming from somewhere else. And they're all coming based largely on one religion. And it's changing the character of that entire country. And I would say the entire continent. And we are really at a tipping point on this. And so are the MAGA right people in the United States who say it's the Jews, it's the Jews, it's the Jews, it's all their problem, are they any help at all in this conversation? No. And you're going to see some things this morning. And so when they had this thing on transgenderism, they said a working class woman being hounded by management for wrong think on trans ideology. This lady said, there's male and female. And she was drummed out of her job in the UK because she didn't go to college. So college has not become a place where you go to be educated. It's a place where you go to get your brains beat out of you. And you become ideologically pure. Here's a UK professor. I can finally speak up on trans social contagion, says ex-Harvard academic. Note, ex-Harvard. Why? Because he didn't toe the party line. He changed things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what happened at the UN this week. big meetings, supposed to be Monday, maybe Tuesday morning, went in all day Wednesday, all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday. Like I said, if you want to torture yourself, go to UN Multimedia website, click on the recent videos, and you can watch all of that stuff and everybody parading up there. And other than Israel and the United States, pretty much everybody was fully on board with this. And so this is the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, and we've heard all the promise Saudi Arabia wants to normalize things with Israel. But they said, two-state solution is key to regional stability, said the Saudi foreign minister. And he doesn't seem like he's out in. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, said the same thing. And they put out this 30-page document. I was discussing it with Olivier Melnick, a good friend. I do a lot of podcasts with him. And Olivier said, I sent him this document. He called me back. He said, did you get this from the Babylon Bee? And I said, no, it came from Babylon. Not the Babylon Bee. This is what they want. This is what they think will do it. And so again, plowshares or swords into plowshares, and they're beating on Israel to try to accomplish the same thing. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, he said this: we want an unarmed state of Palestine. Now, let me ask you just a simple question. Do you believe him or not believe him? He is an abject liar. Don't believe a word that he says. He's in the 20th year of the 4-year term, or 20th year of the 4-year term that he was elected to back in the mid-2000s. And what's he all talking about now? We're going to have elections. We're going to have elections. I don't believe him. I'm sorry. 20 years of experience that they're not going to have elections. We are ready to proceed with general elections that will not include political forces or individuals who do not adhere to the program and commitment of the Palestine Liberation Organization and international legitimacy. This excludes anyone who does not accept the principle of one state, one law, and one legitimate weapon, as well as the need to implement the two-state solution in accordance with international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative that was started by the Saudis back around 2001, right after 9/11. As outlined in the International Peace Conference in New York, we want the state of Palestine to be unarmed, including the Gaza Strip. So here's the simple, Mahmoud Abbas, if you want us to believe a word you say, collect all the arms in Judea and Samaria and Gaza and bring them to a place where they can be disposed of. He's not going to do that. He would be killed. For a lot of people hate him anyway. But everybody wants a two-state solution. Everybody chimed in. For example, here is Canada. Mark Carney of Canada. Canada has long been committed to a two-state solution, an independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state living side by side with the state of Israel in peace and security. And here's his statement that he issued in a quote: we reiterate that Hamas must immediately release all hostages taken in the horrific terrorist attack of October 7, that Hamas must disarm, and that Hamas must play no role in the future government of Palestine. That's what the Arabs are saying now. The Arab League released similar statements. Canada will always steadfastly support Israel's existence as an independent state in the Middle East, living in peace and security. Any path to lasting peace for Israel and also requires a viable and stable Palestinian state, and one that recognizes Israel's inalienable right to security and peace. They don't recognize this. By the way, Mahmoud Abbas, I got an idea. Take all the money that you're paying to terrorists in prison, and the longer the sentence, the higher the monthly payment for attacking Israel and Jews, and send them to Christian or Jewish charities. That would be a good first step. Do you think he's going to do that? Not a chance. Not a chance. So here is Keir Starmer of the UK making an announcement about the UK's views on the subject.
2023, Hamas perpetrated the worst massacre in Israel's history. Every day since then, the horror has continued. The hostages are still being held today. The Palestinian people have endured terrible suffering. Now, in Gaza, because of a catastrophic failure of aid, we see starving babies, children too weak to stand, images that will stay with us for a lifetime. The suffering must end. Yesterday, I discussed this with President Trump, and we're mounting a major effort to get humanitarian supplies back in by air, and UK aid has been airdropped into Gaza today.
I'm sorry, I can't. That's an act of mercy. I shut that off. And this is from the Times, the UK this morning, how Gaza engulfed starmer. And Melanie Phillips has a great post she put up. Britain's Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is widely thought to be boring but decent, technocratic but moderate, a bulwark of centrism against the crazies. This is wildly mistaken. He is monstrous. And she goes on and on and on in a very long post. Like French President Emmanuel Macron, who has also threatened to recognize Palestine, Starmer is thus rewarding Hamas for its barbaric and depraved pogrom in southern Israel on October 7th, 2023. Is blaming Israel, not Hamas, for the appalling situation in Gaza. This even though Hamas is responsible for the war by slaughtering 1,200 Israelis. And she goes on, far worse, Starmer is now threatening the Israeli victims of Hamas. Like some mafioso who's draped his sawed-off shotgun in a keffiyeh, he says that unless Israel stops the war by September, he'll recognize Palestine because there's going to be a big meeting around the time of the Feast of the Trumpets in Israel, and they're going to declare a two-state solution at the UN. That's his plan. This is what they're planning on doing. They're going to recognize Palestine. And he lies with some impunity. A friend of mine sent me this editorial cartoon about Keir Starmer being interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, so of all the lies you've told the British people, Sir Keir, which is your favorite? I don't tell lies. Yeah, that's my favorite one too. By the way, in the UK, more children than any other name that are born in the UK have the name of Sinwar, his first name, as their first name over the last year. And it's been that way for a couple of years. Does that indicate that there might be a problem? I mean, so if in Germany, after World War II, everybody was naming their child Adolf, we would think we probably still have a big ideological problem to overcome. And we do. That's Canada. King Abdullah II of Jordan. He can't be left out of the pile on Israel. Gaza crisis is the worst in modern history. Really. 1 million dead Syrians just to your north. Close to 1 million dead Sudanese to your west. Hundreds of thousands of Yemenis dead. King Abdullah, and you want to focus on the ones in Gaza? That's the worst in modern history? Listen, let me just be very blunt about King Abdullah. He is a propagandist. He is not to be believed. He claims to be a direct descendant of Muhammad. And he will run around talking about we need to preserve the Christian and Islamic holy sites in Jerusalem and never mention Israel or the Jews. I don't like him. Arab League says Hamas must disarm to achieve a Palestinian state. Sky News, Hamas said it will not disarm unless and by the way, so Steve Witkoff is over there and he says, Hamas is going to disarm themselves. We're going to have peace in the Middle East. The presidential envoy. So here, how long did that age very well? No, it didn't, because Hamas came out and said, Hamas has said it will not disarm unless an independent Palestinian state is established with Jerusalem as its capital. It comes after media reports quoting U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff claimed the militant group had shown a willingness to disarm. Oops. Didn't go very well. Here's a little Sky News point on that today.
The UK Telegraph have reported that Hamas have now come out just in the last few hours and said that they will not stop now. They will not lay down their weapons or do anything. They will not stop until they have Jerusalem as the capital of a Palestinian state that occupies all of the current area of Israel. So that is what you have done, Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong, Jim Chalmers, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Mark Carney. You have done this, and every single person marching on the bridge today is doing this. You're encouraging the perpetration of this horror show. You are doing it. You're the ones responsible, and you should be so ashamed of yourself. Hamas have now, as James said, got the moral high ground because of you marchers on the bridge. Great work. Wow, you're really clever. Sorry, James, carry on.
Well, no, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself, Rowan.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, the whole notion of a two-state solution is fanciful. It's just not feasible. It doesn't matter if post-Hamas what happens. If the population there votes for another Hamas 2.0 that wants to eradicate Israel, wants to get rid of the Jewish community, then you're not going to be able to have a two-state solution. You can't have a two-state solution when one side wants to destroy the other side. So we've got to start being realistic when we talk about these things, because it's all very good and well to say that's the ideal, that's what we're aiming for. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But really, how is it feasible? Let's look at the reality of what's happening in that region at the moment.
Well, it is interesting that you look at this.
You mentioned the European leaders, from Starmer to Macron and others, who are giving comfort to Hamas. I think the bigger issue, for Israel is what's happening in the US, because the change in public opinion in the US is stark, it's dramatic. We're talking about 60% plus swings in some categories of people whose sympathies have shifted in recent years. And that is very significant, and you can't ignore that. You can't say, well, they're wrong. This is public opinion, and it's powerful, and it definitely is something that politicians are going to be looking at. So going forward, that's something that also has to be taken into consideration. I think so many Australians are just sick of foreign conflicts, foreign hatreds being imported here and shoved in our faces. That's another issue that you've got to be honest about. So many Australians just have their own issues. They've got a cost of living crisis. We've got all sorts of societal issues here. Do we really need to be importing foreign hatred?
No, but I'll pick you up on that. Sorry, you go, James.
I was going to say one other thing, though. You talk about support in the United States slipping away from Israel. One of the other interesting things that we've had this week is that support for Hamas in the Arab world has also been absolutely melting away. And in fact, this week, this here is going to be the real key to peace. And this is, let's not take our eyes off the prize here, which is the whole realignment of the Middle East, that the Abraham Accords diplomacy that Trump started in his first term and that is continuing in this term is continuing with. Hamas has no support in the Arab world anymore. Iran is now all but neutered. And so where does Hamas have its support? In Western capitals and universities.
Look, I think he's misreading the situation. It's very bad. In Sydney, the pictures of the Opera House, the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Picture this morning, over 100,000 people protesting in favor of Hamas in Sydney. And there, in the picture below here, you see these people, big picture of the Ayatollah Khamenei being carried, and here carrying the Save Gaza or whatever banner Julian Assange, one of the darlings of the right wing, protesting in favor of Hamas. Do you think we have a problem? I never trusted that guy, by the way, and that's probably a reason. Here's another picture of the Harbor Bridge, the picture of Khomeini, and then the poster, the March for Humanity, Save Gaza. Happened today in Sydney, and here's what they were shouting. Listen to this as they marched across the bridge. You can hear it. You hear what they're saying? Long live the Intifada. Long live the Intifada. What happened in the Intifada? They killed Jews. They blew up Jews. Go to Nablus. Every square you drive through in Nablus is a martyr square of somebody who was a suicide bomber in Israel that killed people. They're praised. This is in Israel that you see this, in Nablus, known as Neapolis back in the time of Jesus. That's in Sydney this morning. We have a big, big, big problem. So here's some other things. This is from the comment section of the European officials off the record. They said, well, we've got a problem, but we can't say anything about it. Oh, because Europe is free, right? Even Putin, I guess that's one of those Norm Crosby malapropisms that I love that guy, but I got his humor. European officials off the record, they're like, we can't talk about this. We're concerned, but we can't talk about it because it's not right. Front page of the Israel, Hayom, and Jerusalem Post today has yet another hostage. More starvation found in Gaza. Here is the New York Post this morning. Starved of humanity. And here's a video of this other guy in the tunnels. By the way, in here, I've eaten for 3 days. He's keeping track of when he gets to eat. And he said there was another thing they made me do. I think there it is. They made him dig his own grave and filmed it to distribute to the world. So go take a survey. Go look at social media today and count the number of times that Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Dave Smith, whatever that comedian guy is, and Piers Morgan, who posted this video and said this is terrible treatment of humanity. You won't find it anywhere. It's egregiously bad. So John Spencer, there's a link in the show notes, Spencer at SpencerGuard on X. What are Israel's choices in Gaza? The insanity of double standards and uninformed analysis. And he talks about the fact, everybody says, all these people at GHF, they're killing people. They're shooting people that come for aid. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that's been set up, and I guess at least the head of it appears to be Johnny Moore, a Baptist pastor. And they're accusing them of killing these kids. Do you think Hamas might shoot them? I mean, really, do you think it's just possible? Do you know where those bullets came from when it happens? So Andrew Fox went to Gaza this week. He was interviewed on, which I think is one of the greatest names for a podcast channel. It's called Triggernometry. And so they interviewed him, and they're wrestling with, what do we do? How do you solve this? And because we in the West, we can't get the mindset right. Here you go. The destruction in Gaza is deniable, but the real question is why? And they ask Andrew Fox.
Andrew, you were on the ground in Gaza. What did you see?
Absolute devastation. Let's not pretend that the Rafah isn't destroyed. I don't think there's any sense in trying to whitewash what's happened in Gaza in the sense of everything being destroyed. But the important thing is why. Okay, and if we look at how, I spoke earlier about adaptation. In Gaza City, when the IDF was assaulting through, they would clear house to house, just as we would, going through an urban environment. There was a 4-month pause put in before Rafah. Over that 4 months, you might remember All Eyes on Rafah as a campaign.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, huge international pressure. Actually, most of the evacuation from Rafah was done by Hamas. They moved people out so that they could then booby trap all the houses. They'd seen what the IDF were doing in Gaza City. They knew they were fighting house to house. And so they decided that if the IDF was going house to house, each house would have an IED. And I think it's a lot more advanced than people realize. We're kind of used to the idea of IEDs being these kind of pressure plates in the ground like we saw in Afghanistan or Iraq. In Gaza, they are in the tunnel shafts that go into houses, 57,000 tunnel shafts in Gaza that lead to the tunnels that are 500 kilometers long. They are everywhere. So the tunnel shaft will have an IED. There'll be a camera wired into the tunnels so they can watch for the IDF entering. And then they'll be able to remotely detonate the IED when they see soldiers in the house. So at the start of the Rafah campaign, the IDF had quite bad casualties from this, to the point where they had to completely change their tactics, where they now send a drone into the building first. If there's nothing found by the drone, they send in a dog. And then only then do they send in troops, but even then only in 4-man teams rather than platoons or sections, to try and minimize the casualties if anything does go bang. Now, if that's every other house in Rafah, that's not a workable option. So as soon as you find the IED, you can't go firm and just call for the explosive ordnance disposal like we used to in Afghanistan. That would take hours. You'd never get anywhere. And so they've quite legitimately just leveled the buildings that are IED'd. Now, that has caused incredibly large amounts of destruction.
But then if that IED blows up, it's going to level the building just the same,
exactly.
right? So
Exactly.
I see your point about that.
Yeah, it's kind of a good point. Hamas is doing this. Stop with all of the nonsense. By the way, in the Times of London today, they talked about genocide and destruction. You see this picture? Look at Israel really did a job, right? Look at that devastation. Niall Ferguson, he's married to Ayan Hirsi Ali, who I understand is converted to Christianity. She was raised Muslim in Somalia. One of the most incredibly brave women on the planet. You should look her up, follow her, read what she writes. So her husband, Niall Ferguson, is a conservative guy. He has an article in the Times of London yesterday or today. A genocide is underway, but it's not in Gaza. It's in Ukraine. And who are all the people on the right in America supporting? The guy who did that. By the way, the guy who's president, although it's questionable whether he's writing this, but he just says, he writes to Trump and he says, makes threats of nuclear war. We're ready to go to nuclear war with you guys. So Trump responds, I've just been informed that almost 20,000 Russian soldiers died this month in the ridiculous war with Ukraine. Russia has lost 112,000 soldiers since the beginning of the year. That's a lot of unnecessary death. Ukraine, however, has also suffered greatly. They have lost approximately 8,000 soldiers since January 1, probably higher. And that number does not include their missing. Ukraine has also lost civilians, but in smaller numbers as Russia rockets crash into Kyiv and other Ukrainian locales. And Ukraine returns the favor. This is a war that should have never happened. I'm just here to see if I can stop it. And so he says, listen, Dmitry Medvedev, you're going to do, what did he say? The highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council. I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. And then he puts this on any one of his posts now. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Exclamation point. Trump's ordered nuclear subs to be moved. And so, look, did Trump buy in? This is headline on the left from the New York Times today, on the right from the Times of London, I think. And so, I mean, did Trump make a mistake by putting these nuclear subs out there on alert? So you could say, well, he fell for it. But how do you know whether Medvedev is serious? And I don't think Medvedev's writing all this. I think it's Putin propagandists that are, they're saying it so Putin doesn't have to. Okay, so Putin has plausible deniability. That's my opinion. And look, Russia had a massive earthquake. In fact, this is, their volcano started erupting after the earthquake. This was on July 30th. And then this morning, I don't know, it's in the I think it's in the Telegraph, another earthquake and volcano erupting in Russia. And so Russia has this narrative, we're doing God's work in Ukraine. God is blessing us. Oh, really? Or is he maybe sending you a message that you're not getting? I'm sorry. And so tsunami waves reach Hawaii after Russia quake. That was the other day. It is all just in 1 week. I mean, what's next week going to be? A 4-hour update? I don't know. Maybe. But so all of this focuses on hatred of Israel. I have a couple clips that I'm going to play you, and then I have some on AI that I want to talk to you about. This is Pierre Morgan. It's interesting that all of these, so you just replace the G and the A with an O, and you got the right name for him. It's interesting that all prominent pro-Israeli voices on here refuse to believe any Gaza casualty numbers published by the Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry, except the veracity of the hostage pics videos posted by Hamas without hesitation. These are not Hamas pictures. These are the people that were released, pictures taken by a bunch of people. This is Gideon Saar, Dumasani, Washington, who I've interviewed. In Egypt, Coptic Christians were the majority. Now they constitute 10%. Well, here's what Gideon Saar said in an interview, another great name for a podcast, Impact Theory. I mean, our staff needs to come up with a better thing than Prophecy Update. But anyway, here's Gideon Saar. He's a Jewish guy. He can be a little bit, he's pretty good at sort of satire. So sometimes it's like, who is this guy? But this was a very good interview. Here's what he says.
In the Middle East, every single society that had existed prior to Islam has been eradicated, right? In Egypt, Coptic Christians were the majority. Now they constitute 10% of Egypt, okay? In Syria, there was huge Christians. Lebanon used to be a predominantly Christian country. Within my lifetime and yours, Lebanon went from being predominantly Christian to now being majority Muslim. Within our lifetime, not 500 years. What happened to the Iraqi Christians? Persia had a culture before Islam. Now it's become Islamic. So no ideology has conquered and colonized as much as Islam has. So if you're worried about the colonization of Zionism, then by any stretch of the imagination, if you're going to be logical, then you have to be worried and upset about the colonization of 56 countries that were once not Islamic. And in many cases, they became Islamized through brute force. That's why there is the sword of Islam. It doesn't capture that we're going to cut bananas together. It captures that I put the sword to your neck, and when I conquer you, I give you choices, 3 choices. Either convert, or die, or live as a dhimmi. Dhimmi means as a, not even second-class citizen, you're a third-class citizen.
you're a slave. And so it's interesting. Everybody's, oh, look what Israel did. They took over this little teeny tiny country. It's awful. They took over this little teeny tiny country. They're colonizers. How big do they want to get? Well, Tucker Carlson interviewed John Mersheimer. John Mersheimer co-authored a book called The Israel Lobby. He believes Israel causes everything bad. So Tucker interviewed him again. He's pro-Russian shill. He's pro-Hamas. He's anti-Israel on steroids. So Tucker interviewed him because, like when Tucker interviewed Munther Isaac, the Palestinian pastor from Bethlehem, did he mention anything that Gideon Saar just talked about how Christians are leaving Bethlehem and other places and Judea and Samaria? It's not because Jews are driving them out. Stop with these lies, Tucker, Mersheimer, Candace, Daryl Cooper. You're all a bunch of liars. You're despicable human beings. So here's Tucker interview. This is about 4 minutes. Sit through it. I want you to listen what Mersheimer says about Israel and Tucker's reaction. Here we go.
The area, that's a big hit. Why would you be willing to go through all of that?
I'm going to back that up and start it over. Here we go.
The area, that's a big hit. Why would you be willing to go through all of that to get Gaza? Why do they want it?
Well, the Zionists from the beginning have wanted a greater Israel. And David Ben-Gurion wrote a piece in 1918, and David Ben-Gurion, of course, is the founding father of Israel.
Yes.
Wrote a piece in 1918. I don't think it's ever been published in English. It's just in Yiddish, where he describes what his goals are for a greater Israel, right? And it obviously includes Green Line Israel, Gaza, the West Bank. It includes parts of the East Bank. It includes parts of southern Syria. It includes parts of southern Lebanon. And it includes the Sinai Peninsula. Just think about that. That was Ben-Gurion's vision. And this was a vision that was shared by almost all the early Zionist leaders. And there are still many people in Israel who are in favor of a greater Israel. They don't want a tiny Israel. The Israel that was created in 1948 is a tiny state.
Yes.
Even with Gaza and the West Bank, it's quite small. It's a postage stamp-like state, right? They want more territory, and they believe they have a historical right to that territory. Israel has never said, these are our final borders. What are Israel's final borders? They've never been articulated. And the reason is the Israelis don't want to say out loud. The early Zionists did not say out loud what their intentions were. David then...
Okay, so this is a map of greater Israel that I found. And this is what Israel wants, okay? By the way, they had the whole Sinai. They gave it back, right? Didn't they give it back? With the treaty with Egypt? And so listen to what Mersheimer said and analyze it. He claims to be this great academic. If you're in a class of his, you're being defrauded. Because you're learning from someone who doesn't understand history and fact. He says, look at how evil Israel is. They will never tell us what they want their final borders to be. You just heard Gideon Saar. Islam has conquered country after country after country. Show me one time John Mersheimer, the great geopolitical historian, where he's asked this question. Where has Islam ever said they want their final borders to be? Where has Erdogan ever said he wants his final borders to be? It's anti-Jew hatred on steroids, and Tucker Carlson is the pivot point around a lot of it. Is that clear? And listen, I say this, and people write to me, and they say, I haven't noticed anything. Are you not paying attention? I mean, seriously. And here's Matt Gaetz. He was going to be the Attorney General of the United States. This is what he said in a post video from One American News. I don't know. Everything is going to pot right now. So here's Matt Gaetz.
We've shared with you our view that Israel doesn't want peace. They don't merely want Iran to denuclearize. If Trump is right and key nuclear sites have been destroyed, what is Israel still fighting for? Regime change, obviously. We told you that from the beginning. That's what this is all about to Israel. And it isn't regime change for the sake of turning Iran into a long nation-building exercise like Iraq. Israeli elites believe they are better positioned in global markets if places like Dubai, Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Riyadh are smothered in tens of millions of war refugees. They want these rich Muslim markets to look at skies full of missiles, not a future of opportunity. I think it's that simple. This is a gut check moment for Israeli Prime Minister and perennial war advocate Bibi Netanyahu. Will he bend to Trump's demands for peace? Or will he continue his air bombing campaign to decapitate the regime of Iran?
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. By the way, it is God's blessing that that man never became Attorney General of the United States. He is, you see the anti-Semitic tropes in there. The Jews are all about the money. What would Ilhan Omar say? All about the Benjamins, baby. The $100 bills. And he talks about skies full of missiles. Those are missiles coming from Iran into Israel, you moron. I'm serious. This guy, the right has lost it in large part. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, stop following. Don't give them any money. Don't listen to them. They've lost the plot of the Bible, Scripture, Christianity, and everything. Go read Romans 11, Matt. This really, we should have sort of like a blood pressure monitor on me, and we can kind of see the graph spike. This really bothers me. Okay, so here is, and again, I apologize. I use a thing to download, and this week somehow the download videos, it gets it out of sync, and it so it just creates a lot more time, and I just didn't notice it till this morning. Look at this. Sean Strickland and Mixed Martial Arts. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I will vote for a Democrat over an AIPAC Republican candidate. 4 years of a Democrat sounds easier than a politician owned by a foreign government. Owned by a foreign, and you see how they show this? The art that's used, the pictures, look at what they're doing. Remember the famous New York Times editorial cartoon in the foreign New York Times of the blind Trump being led around by the Netanyahu wiener dog? Remember that from a few years back? Okay, so now this is trigger warning. This is Tucker interviewing Candace Owens. It's about 2.5 minutes long. Candace has completely lost the part. And since this is out of sync, she's going to look even crazier than she really is. So just a forewarning. Okay, so look at what Tucker did this week. He has on Mersheimer, the Jew-hating, Israel-hating Mersheimer, the greatest academic. A couple weeks ago, Daryl Cooper on for a repeat, the greatest historian in America now. Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's killing kids. He platforms this week, part one of a two-part interview, Tony Aguilar, who is a contractor for GHC, Gaza Humanitarian GHF, in Gaza. I'm going to put up part two next week. And by the way, the CEO and people and management at GHF and everybody at GHF has come out and said, that guy is not believable. He's doing it. He's got a bone to pick with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. He's a liar. Nobody trusted him, and they fired him. Truth. So immediately, well, who's going to interview him? Well, Tucker Carlson. So here he is with, and I had to include the Tucker laugh from the Candace interview. So it starts with that, and then she goes into her views on Israel, why she no longer supports Israel.
All totally fair.
Yeah.
Does any of, I mean, to the extent that we can project forward and guess, does any of this come out? I mean, to a greater extent than it has? I mean, is there ever like a public resolution of this story?
No, because Israel's controlling our government. So no, the answer is no. Trump is powerless against him. We haven't had, I don't think we've been a sovereign nation since they shot JFK. And when I say they, it's like people online say, what do you mean by they? I'm talking about Israel. I don't want you guys to read in between. I'm talking about Israel. So let's stop making that a taboo subject because they've gone mask down. Everything they're doing is demonic. I want nothing to do with it. I will never support Israel into the future after what they've done to these children. The starvation campaign. I don't care. Please write your article. You've already written them all. I don't know what you could add about me. But I do not support Israel. And I don't think that Jewish Americans should support Israel. And I hope that they're now having those conversations. I see many of them recognizing that they have been propagandized into believing they have to support this demonic state. And that's in large part thanks to their birthright trip. Yeah, that mask down moment for Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL when he got caught on the hot mic, it was released. He didn't know that he was being recorded. And he's like, saying that they've got to get TikTok under control. He's like, we have a generational issue with TikTok. We need to do something about this, like what we did with Birthright. What does that tell you? That the entire purpose of that Birthright trip, telling every Jewish American, you forget a free trip to Israel, was to propagandize you into believing that you have some affinity with this made-up country in the Middle East, like in 1948, that you have to, react when something's happening to them, or you have to look away when they're doing things that are so obviously wrong and demonic. And so I'm hoping now that we're getting to that point where people can recognize that whether you're Black, you don't have to agree with BLM. Whether you're Jew, allowing your identity to shape your morality is problematic, okay? And Israel, in and of itself, is a demonic nation. I will never support Israel, right? So I went from working for PragerU to I will never support Israel. So that's how much the scales have fallen from my eyes about what they are involved in. And if this isn't your wake-up call to just look at the footage of what they are doing, they're playing Hunger Games and throwing food at them and then killing people and seeing who survives. It's just at your fingertips. You have to take a look at what Israel is doing.
So I don't want to play this. Okay, good. She also, in that interview, she talked about, I had a divine visitation and the scales fell from my eyes. I think it's self-evident what she is. Okay, what's her next grift going to be? Because she was pro-BLM, then anti-BLM, then pro-Israel, now anti... So, she's sort of bouncing up. Pray for her children. She has 4. She just had another baby. She has 4 children now. So in this interview with Mersheimer, Tucker said this is between the two of them. Tucker says this, the current ruling coalition, because the contradiction is too obvious, it's not America first, and people can see that because it's so evident, but what are the causes of it? Why would, for the first time, as you said, in recorded history, a nation spend, whatever it is, $1 trillion a year? This is direct from the transcript. Tucker is saying this about America, spending $1 trillion a year in effect to serve the interest of another country I believe there's one simple answer, the Israel lobby. He said we're spending $1 trillion a year to support Israel. He is a lying, Jew-hating person. Stop following him. Call him out on it. What was it that our friend Jacob said that we need to remember? The first Christians were Jews. The last Christians will be Jews. Did you hear that? The first Christians were Jews. The last Christians will be Jews. That's what we see from the Bible, the prophetic scriptures of the true holy word of God, Bible. Fact. Hadn't happened yet, but it will. So unprecedented. It just so happens that today is Tish B'Av. And somebody posted this, David Greenfield. This really resonates, this Tish B'Av. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her of all her friends, all her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. By the way, today, Tish B'Av is 666 days since October 7th. It's just a coincidence. I'm just telling you, take note of it. But today, on the Temple Mount in Israel, the Israeli Internal Security Minister on the left was singing on the Temple Mount. The Interior Security Minister of Israel, Ben-Gvir, whether you like him or not, a Jewish guy on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And on the right, Jews singing, waiting to go to the Temple Mount. Watch this. Okay, so listen, we were already sharing the gospel. And then on the Temple Mount, I mean, 3 weeks ago, this wasn't happening. By the way, today, thousands of Jews ascended the Temple Mount. Thousands. You went millennium without thousands. Okay, and then this happened this morning on the Temple Mount. Okay. Today in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, just a couple more things. Microsoft, Meta soaring because of AI. NVIDIA over 4 trillion, Microsoft over 4 trillion. The stock of Meta is way, way up. Way up. This is a question asked in one newspaper. How about that? I think this is the New York Post. AI passes for human. You know those goofy little things, those CAPTCHA things where you got to find the things and put them in the right order? Why did they do that? Because computers couldn't do that. Not anymore. They're passing those tests now. That's a big security issue. The White House this week came out with yet another report. This will be discussed at our roundtable in a week, in 10 days, I guess. August 13th, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology. And on War Room, and look, I don't like the way things are going on War Room, but they are doing good information on AI. They had Joe Allen on this week to talk a couple things. He played clips of Eric Schmidt, Sam Altman from OpenAI, and Mark Zuckerberg from Meta, talking about AI assistance, how close we are to artificial generative intelligence and artificial superintelligence. They think it might be within 2 years, artificial superintelligence, which means you would be able, as Mark Zuckerberg says, you could carry around in your pocket an assistant that would be smarter than every human being on earth combined. You saw the video I played last week. They're doing PhD level stuff and they're getting pretty good results from it. So here is a guy who used to be with OpenAI. Let's see. Used to be with OpenAI. He's now sort of coming out and saying, listen to what he says, put it into the context of what we talk about in Bible prophecy.
Suppose that I'm wrong. Suppose that I and all the experts are basically wrong about the loss of control thing, and it's basically not an issue. We solve it one way or another. Suppose that works out, and suppose we end up with AIs that are perfectly steerable, controllable, AIs who only have the goals that we want them to have, and don't interpret them in any different ways or whatever. Then there's the question of, well, who gets to choose the goals, right? Who controls the AIs? That's the concentration of power issue. And I think the default answer is, well, a tech company. Whichever tech company was, winning the race and was able to get their AIs smart enough to do the AI research first, then does a lot of AI research really fast and ends up with this commanding lead over all the other tech companies where they have the best AIs by far that are also, super intelligent, better than humans at everything, including politics, including warfare, including, propaganda, etc. If they're in control of that, then that could potentially put one tech company and possibly even just one man in the tech company, such as the CEO, in a position to effectively take over the world.
So, when I use this in my title, the clock on the left, is it overstated? I don't think so. Okay, lots to talk about next week, tomorrow, maybe even this afternoon. Anyway, thanks for watching. And again, if we have technical difficulties, we apologize for that. Look under Fellowship Bible Chapel, YouTube channel, Real FBC on Rumble, also on Subsplash, our app, to get these things. And we appreciate it. Let's pray. Lord, thanks so much for your word. Lord, we just pray that you'll help us to take to heart the things that we've seen today that indicate that we live at a really unique time of history. Just like the early apostles lived at a unique time of history at your first coming, we appear to live at the same time frame regarding your second coming. Pray that we'll take that to heart, use it as opportunities to share the gospel with those around us. And always remember that we're not doom and gloom, but we have the hope in the soon glorious, fantastic, awesome return of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.